Right, this is a section on kinship. And in the first part of it, we're going to talk about what a kinship system is and how it's analyzed in anthropology. In this next section, it's going to be a separate video. I'm going to talk about different sorts of kinship and other patterns related to kinship. First, I want to mention that we had two supplemental readings assigned. First one is by Evelyn Blackwood. It's called From Mothers to Daughters, and it is a piece on the Minangkabau in Indonesia. And specifically, she's studying matrilineal kinship, and we'll talk about what that is later on in the lecture, probably in the second half. And the other reading is by Jim Atchison, and he wrote a book called Lobster Gangs of Maine, and this is an excerpt from that. It's one chapter. And he points out in that chapter that the kinship relation is closely tied to their economic strategy. So you want to have a look at those two. If you're short on time, spend more of your time on Evelyn Blackwood. We will make reference to that on a number of occasions. Kinship system. First of all, we want to get a definition. A kinship system refers to the totality of kin relations, kin groups, and terms used for classifying kin in a society. Those things all kind of sound the same, but they're slightly different. Kin relations, those are the people that you're actually related to, and we'll talk about different types of relationships in a bit here. Kin groups are how you put those relations together in your mind, how they fit together, and how people divide them up. Terms used for classifying kin are the terms that people actually use to identify their kin. Right? So they're all similar, all talking about the same thing. There's slightly different aspects of it. Here I want to point out that kinship is biologically based, but it's culturally constructed. And I don't know if you've heard that kind of construction before. But it's something that's common in the social sciences. They talk about there are different things that inform our behavior. Biology is certainly one of them, meaning there's a biological basis to who is seen as related to whom. You have parents. You know how you came about in the first place, and so you know what your biological relationship is to them. Right now, how you interpret that relationship is potentially variable, and that's what the culturally constructed part refers to. Culturally constructed means that we interpret the systems that we cope with or we construct the systems that we use to cope with biology, and we interpret biology differently within those systems. All right. In terms of describing kinship, we have a number of different terms used in anthropology. For a long period of time, kinship was a central focus in American anthropology. They thought that if they understood kinship, they could understand many other aspects of human culture, and the peculiarities of an individual culture might be determined by the way that it understands kinship. So these are some terms that anthropologists have used to define different members of a person's kin group. What we see to the bottom right, something we've seen before in the politics lecture, I believe. It's a kinship diagram or kinship chart, and we went through the different symbols that are associated with that when we pulled that up in that lecture. Triangles represent males, circles represent females, equal signs represent a pairing that results in children, generally a marriage, not always. And the lines coming down from the equal signs are offspring from those pairings. Right. So in this case, let's look at the triangle and circle here. They got married at some point or had some pairing, and they had children, and they had one daughter and two sons. One son, two sons. Their second son got married to this woman here, who was the daughter of these two, and had these kids. And among them is one boy, one girl, and one ego. All right, what's ego? Ego is the designated person that the diagram is about. Right, and if you think about it, if you're trying to track somebody's genealogy, you want to designate the person at the center of the chart, because all the relationships change depending on which person you're talking to. So on these diagrams, there will always be an ego designated. In this case, it's designated as a square. Usually in those cases, the person's sex will be indicated elsewhere. So there'll be a lot of notes accompanying these charts. This is a bare bones kind of chart. So ego, technically it's from Latin. The word ego in Latin means I, the personal pronoun I. And that's also it's been borrowed into English a number of times. That's also the source of the word ego in psychology, meaning your identity, your self-esteem. Right, so ego has been borrowed in a couple of times. This is one usage of it directly from the Latin. It means I, it refers to the person that the chart is about. All right, on the chart, we have represented three different types of kin: consanguineal kin, affinal kin, and fictive kin. Consanguineal is pretty straightforward. If you speak Spanish or any Romance language, you can probably work that out. Con means with, and sanguine is blood. So consanguineal means with blood, literally blood relations, biological relations. And we all have a grasp on that. It's pretty straightforward. Blood relations make you kin. A final kin refers to in-laws, people that you are related to by marriage. Right? We call them in-laws. It's not technically fall into that category exactly, but a final kin are people related to you by marriage. Right. So for this ego, ego's not married. Ego's father, right? Ego would be consanguineal kin to ego's father, because that's his biological father, his or her. I don't know if it's a male or female. Ego's father, however, would not have a consanguineal relationship with ego's mother. That wouldn't work out. It would violate the incest taboos. On the other hand, by marriage, not only does he have a final relationship with her, but has a final relationship with all of her family. So all of these are his final kin. These are consanguineal kin. These are consanguineal kin to this father. Fictive kin is the last category. Fictive kin refers to people who are unrelated but treated as kin. That is, they don't fit into the other two categories. They're not consanguineal. They're not affinal, but they're treated as kin. And by treated as kin, I mean it's not just somebody you call brother or uncle or something like that. It's somebody that would actually go on your genealogical chart, right? So the basic category that fits into fictive kin is adoption. And adoption is recognized pretty much around the world. Wherever you go, there's a mechanism for adopting people. And if you think about the dynamic of adoption in Western culture, there generally is no question about the relationship. Just because somebody's adopted, you accept that is now the person's father, sister, daughter, son, whatever, and they fit onto your genealogical chart. You put them in your family tree. Right. Now, there may or may not be a note that it's an adoption to distinguish them from consanguineal or a final kin, but they may not make that note at all. Right. Nobody would think you were lying if you said talked about your parents for 10 years and then they found out you were adopted. Oh, those aren't your real parents. That's not how it works. Adoption puts you onto their family tree in the same way as consanguineal or affinal kin, even though it's not a biological relationship. Moving forward. Okay, I said that kinship systems are biologically based but culturally constructed. Excuse me, and there are a number of factors in that. First of those being people's grasp of biology. We think that's pretty straightforward because we're in the Western world. We learn about biology in grade school and high school and college. Again, they talk about it. Classes like this, they talk about it. We have a pretty good understanding of biology. That's not always the case, and there's a story that I generally tell in class, but I'm not going to get deeply into it in the video here. It's from a book called Into the Heart of Borneo, and it just illustrated that in some cases, and let me just give you the gist of that. Some people went on a trip, and they went into the inland territory in Borneo, and they had this mission they were going on, and they realized that the native people had a different idea about how babies are conceived. Right? They had the idea that people had to have sex 3 times in order for anyone to get pregnant. And because we understand Western science, we understand that's really not true. 1 time will do the trick. But if you believe that, then it's going to change your kinship structure, right? Because people will be born as a result of those pairings, and they have to compensate for that somehow. In that case, they compensated for it by attributing the offspring from what they consider to be insufficient circumstances to a god, so that people had actual gods in their family trees as a result of those pairings. Okay, so their grasp of biology can play a factor in how people construct kinship. As a result, their family trees were constructed differently because they had a different conception of how the biology worked. Subsistence and economy can also play a factor, and if you read the Atchison piece, You will talk about that. It's not a question of deciding who's related to you, but which relationships are important. Right? And those can play a huge role in which people you count as kin and which people really are a factor as kin in your life. There's another article which I've posted. It's not required, but I'm going to post it as an optional reading on Tibetan polyandry. And that was a circumstance in which we haven't gone over the different forms of marriage yet. Polyandry is a situation where a woman can have more than one husband in the group. And in that case, they practice what's called fraternal polyandry. And that is when it's preferred, not only can a woman have more than one husband, but it's preferred that they be brothers. And this is to minimize conflict, more or less. The idea is if men are related to each other, they're less likely to want to kill each other over petty things. Also, they'd be invested in the offspring of their brothers just as much as their own. So the way this worked in practice was a woman would be married, she'd have multiple husbands, and all of the husbands would be called father by all of the children. Right, that's very different from our family tree as a rule. We tend to be very focused on biological affinity and on consanguineal kinship, in other words. And there are a lot of reasons for that. One, our grasp of science, but also it's codified in our law. Right, that is usually the relationship that matters the most legally. So we're very focused on that. They aren't that focused on that at all in the Tibetan case. They didn't really want to know who was the biological father. In fact, if you showed up with a DNA kit and we're going to test everybody and figure out which kid belonged to which father, they'd kick you out of the house probably, because that would only lead to conflict. What they wanted was all of the husbands to be contributing equally to all of the children. And toward that end, they were all called father, whatever the Tibetan word for father was, even though technically some of them were uncles. Now, because of situations like that, anthropologists have had to come up with specialized vocabulary to describe the situations. They use the term pater to refer to the person who serves the social role of the father. So in that Tibetan case, all of the uncles who are married to the same woman would be considered the pater, right, which is the role that they functioned in, and it's why they call them all father in their language. On the other hand, the anthropologists are also interested in the genitor, figure out who is the biological father. Genitor is the biological father. So while an anthropologist may be interested in that, the people who are in those cultures may not be interested in finding out the answer to that little question. In any case, in some cases they do work it out, and they had to have two different terms. Pater, referring to the person who serves the social role of the father, and genitor, for the person who is the biological father of a child. So I'll post that in one of the sections, probably in the family section, as an optional reading, if you want to look at it. We'll break there and pick up in another video.